Thank you. And just for our other committee members, we're going to try to get through the panel, and then we'll get to questions from the committee. Next, Nathan Brostrom, Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer of the University of California.
Thank you, Chairman McCarty, and good afternoon, members of the committee. I would also like to acknowledge and thank Budget Chair Weber and the Speaker and Minority Leader for their comments. We welcome the opportunity to work with all of you on looking at our budget. It's something we spent a lot of time on as the LAO represented. It's a very, very complex budget, but one that deserves the full attention. I have a handout that I'll be walking through. I'll try to direct you to the key pages. The LAO representative did a very good job of giving the overview of the UC budget and our core funds. As you can see on this second slide, the overall budget is nearly $27 billion, and that represents the total revenues and expenditures that are used for instruction of 248,000 students, the research enterprise that he referenced, and the public service endeavors that we do. Most of this budget consists of the medical center activities, sales and services, research contracts and grants, and other activities that are essentially self-supporting. About a quarter of the budget is what we call our core funds, the core functions supporting the educational mission of UC. And as you can see on the pie chart on the right, the core funds are made up of three primary sources: state funds, which used to fund the majority, but now is about 42% of that core funds, tuition and fees, which is now 45%, and other UC general revenues, which includes non-resident tuition, indirect cost recovery, from research contracts and grants, some patent revenues, and others. That makes up about 13% of the core fund budget. And the core funds totaled $6.6 billion in the last fiscal year. And those are the funds which are the mainstay of the operations. Over 3/4 of those are used for academic and staff salaries and employee and retiree benefits. The largest component of the remainder is used for student financial aid. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on when we look at the cost drivers. So we have four main buckets that we look at in our cost drivers. One are mandatory costs. The second is enrollment growth. Third are high priority expenditures for instruction and facilities. And then high priority reinvestments in academic quality. And I'll discuss each of those in greater detail in the following pages. Mandatory costs are those that we must pay regardless of the availability of new funds, and we've outlined what those are for 2015-16. It totals about $125 million against our core fund budget of $6.6 billion. And I'll address each of these in a little more detail. The first one I look at is pension, and there's been a lot made at both the state level and at UC about pension. We currently contribute over $1.3 billion to UCRP. This is something we did not contribute to 5 years ago. The state and the university had agreed to suspend contributions during the fiscal crisis in the early 1990s, and because the UCRP had gotten to a significantly overfunded situation, about 147%, contributions were not started again until 2010. But since that time, we took three significant measures to shore up UCRP. First, we restarted contributions and dramatically increased them. So in 2009-10, we contributed zero as a university. This last year, $1.3 billion, 14% of our employer contributions. That also couples with 8% from each employee. Second, we introduced a new pension tier, which increased the retirement age from 50 to 55 and the maximum age factor from 60 to 65. And finally, we also undertook some internal borrowing, $2.7 billion, which has helped leverage and shore up the pension system. As a result, we have achieved some good results. We are now at 87% funded, up from the mid-70s just a couple of years ago, but we are bearing this entirely on our own. We don't get any funding from the state for it, unlike any other state agency or the Cal State system. We've also taken aggressive efforts to contain our health benefit costs. Again, this is $1.4 billion, a fairly significant component of our budget, about $400 million of that from core funds. Health benefit costs have been rising rapidly, 8% to 12% in recent years. We took several steps. We rebid our whole portfolio. We launched a new healthcare system called UC Care, which is centered primarily around our own medical centers to curb the costs and also keep it in-house. And also, we undertook family member eligibility verification. As a result, we were able to contain the cost to 2.3% last year and 5% this year, and we are forecasting a 5% annual increase going forward. Annuitant health benefit costs are small, but they are ongoing, and we do also have taken some efforts to curb those. When we introduce a new pension tier, we also change the eligibility for retiree health. That will roughly cut our retiree health benefit costs by 40% over time. And we are also changing the copay amounts and requiring more from our retirees. We have a couple of other mandatory costs in compensation. One is in collective bargaining. Represented employees represent approximately 40% of our staff, about a third on core funds, more in the medical centers. The increases in this vary by the bargaining unit, but they have averaged about 4.2% for the current year. The other program that I would characterize as mandatory is the faculty merit. This is something that is a peer review process that is practiced at all research universities. And every 2 or 3 years, faculty members go in for a merit review and then have their compensation increased as a result. And finally, we have a small amount attributed to inflation. We use 2% per year for everything except our purchased utilities, and that we have seen rising about 4% above inflation. Enrollment growth is one area that we feel very, very strongly about. We have the capacity to take more Californians, and we remain committed to the master plan that promises access for all qualified Californians. We have assumed in our long-term plan an annual increase of about 1% a year. That's about 2,200 students in California resident enrollment. We roughly allocate about $10,000 per student there, so that would be about $22 million per year that we would need to accommodate that enrollment growth. There are a couple other high priority costs that I would identify, faculty salaries being one of them. The LAO referenced our remuneration study. We do that annually. The latest one found that our faculty lag their comparators by about 10 to 12%. They lag privates much more than publics, but in aggregate they lag by about 10 to 12%. And that's something that we need to address in order to both recruit and retain these faculty members. A couple other big areas that we are addressing. The state used to fund capital, both new capital projects, but also deferred maintenance and capital renewal. That, under the new format, is left to the university. Our deferred maintenance is a huge bill, and it's one that we have not adequately addressed. We are looking at some balance sheet measures to do that, but we also have a portion in the operating budget every year to try to address that. And we still need to continue to address some seismic and life safety issues, particularly on some of our campuses, and also to catch up with past enrollment growth, where we were taking students but did not have the infrastructure facilities to support them. The other area that I would point to is what we call academic quality. As the LAO representative mentioned, during the fiscal crisis, we undertook many things to reduce our administrative costs and redirect that to academic programs to maintain the academic quality. And those are good things, and those are things that we will both continue and double down in our efforts. However, there are a number of areas that we have fallen behind, frankly, just because we didn't have the ability to fund them. Student-faculty ratio has grown significantly over recent years. Graduate student support packages lag our competitors. We really have not been hiring to replace the faculty members that are either leaving or retiring. And so there's a fairly sizable amount that needs to go into new faculty hires. And then we also want to reinvest in instructional infrastructure, classroom technology, and other instructional equipment. I would point to this chart on slide 13 because this does, it's very similar to what Paul was saying earlier. Our core funds have increased, and they've increased quite dramatically since 07-08, the start of the fiscal crisis. In fact, they went up about $1.4 billion. We are still down from state funding, but we did raise tuition significantly, and we expanded other areas. We expanded non-resident tuition, indirect cost recovery, private philanthropy, as he mentioned. However, if you adjust that and take out the increases that we did in financial aid, which we take a full third out of every new tuition dollar and put it back into institutional financial aid. The increases in UCRP, which we did not have, and they're also adjusted for inflation, we're actually down $200 million since that time, so about a 4% decline in dollars. When you consider the fact that we also added 27,000 more students during that time on a per-student basis, we're down 14%. Now, Paul is right. We have actually looked at other fund sources. We've tried to increase fungible philanthropy that we can use for instruction. Our medical centers are now providing twice as much support for medical schools as the state does. So those are other areas that we're using to maintain our quality. But when we look at basic core funds, we are actually still down, even building in the tuition increases. I did mention some of the administrative efforts we took, and these are ones that are taking place both on every individual campus where they are looking at both their layers and spans or management levels and ways that they can reduce their personnel costs. There are regional efforts underway. San Francisco and Berkeley merged their procurement office, for example, and UCLA provides financial services for both the Office of the President, for Merced, and is looking at it for other campuses. Then we are looking at things that we can do system-wide to take advantage of the size and scale that we have. I mentioned the new healthcare program, UC Care, mentioned some of the things that we are doing in retirement. But we've also had great success in consolidating all of our insurance programs, taking things that used to be done on an individual basis at each campus, doing those system-wide, and driving big savings there. Asset management, we've realized hundreds of millions of dollars of new revenue there. And a statewide energy partnership, which is we've used to lower our costs and bring in new energy efficiencies. So these are ones that President Napolitano has asked us not only to continue, but also to look for new sources so that we are not solely reliant on the state or students for increases. Again, I had mentioned that some of these things we would definitely continue, but one of the ones that has lagged is that we've continued to add students while the faculty has basically been constant. So you see our student-faculty ratio has increased on the aggregate. This varies from campus to campus, but this is the aggregate for the UC system. And the other point I would make, Senior Consultant Martin did a very good job in the report. The one area, though, I do want to point out is that we have had significant payroll growth since 2007, but it almost entirely occurred in our non-core enterprises. In fact, as you can see from this chart, it almost entirely occurred at our teaching hospitals and in physician pay plans. When you look at the general funds and student fees, that's the one at the bottom, it grew by about 5%, so less than the cost of inflation during that time. That reflected both cuts in personnel and the fact that we took furloughs and other measures to curb our costs on those funds during that time. And then finally, I would point out what Budget Chair Weber had mentioned, and something that we are most proud of is one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is that we are a world-class university with very hardworking, high-achieving students, but we remain accessible to all Californians. And this is something that we not only enhanced or maintained, but we also enhanced during the budget crisis. As you can see, UC system enrolls 42% of our undergraduates are Pell Grant recipients. That compares with 23% at other AAU publics, 18% at AAU privates. Across the whole system, that's 75,000 students. 5 of our campuses have more Pell Grant students than the entire Ivy League combined. We think this is probably the most important feature of the university and something that's really critical for the future, not only of the university, but for the state. And it's something that we have really appreciate the partnership with the state, with the federal government, and our own funds to help maintain that. And with that, I guess we'll move on to the Department of Finance before questions.
Thank you. Jillian?
Good afternoon. Jillian Cassee from the Department of Finance. Higher education continues to be a high priority for use of new resources, and the administration recognizes that funding for the university helps to drive innovation and fuel the economy. But as the state is emerging from the largest recession since the Great Depression, the state is reinvesting in higher education in a manner that is sustainable over the long term. The administration values widely accessible, high-quality higher education, but the state's resources remain constrained. We view this budget as an opportunity to explore ways to fund a productive higher education system within available resources and keep higher education affordable for students by keeping tuition and fees as low as they possibly can be. In this context, the governor's budget proposes a $119.5 million increase in 2015-16 with 3 conditions. One, that the university keep tuition at 2011-12 levels, the university not increase non-resident enrollment above current levels, and finally, that the regions take actions to reduce the cost structure of the university, including actions on proposals developed by the Select Advisory Committee on the cost structure of the university, established by the UC Regents in January. And there should have been a handout that went out that reflects the adopted item of the January board meeting. The intent of the advisory committee is for the state and the university to work together to develop solutions that reduce the university's cost structure while maintaining access and enhancing the quality of education for students. The committee is looking broadly at the university's operations with 5 main areas of inquiry. The first is the university's major cost drivers. Second, access to the university at the undergraduate level, along with completion and time to degree for those students. The role of graduate education, the role of research and its impacts on the university's finances, and finally, the use of technology to enhance education. The governor and President Napolitano are the members of this committee, and the committee is jointly staffed by the university's Office of the President as well as staff from the governor's office and the Department of Finance. The committee and its staff are engaging in discussions with experts from within the university and at other institutions around these issues. The committee will present a preliminary report regarding the progress of these efforts at the Regents meeting in March. This will be the first of the series of regular updates and recommendations to the Regents. And just in conclusion, I just want to emphasize that we consider that the work of the committee and the broader discussion of improving access to quality higher education and reducing its costs is to be a highly collaborative process. And we welcome proposals from all that want to be a part of the discussion. We invite people to submit comments, proposals, or general feedback to our email mailbox at uccoststructure@dof.ca.gov. Be happy to take any questions.
Okay. I think we'll stop here for a few seconds, a lot of information, and get to some committee members' questions. Maybe a first one out of the gate is, as you alluded to it just now, as far as the kind of 2-person committee, and hoping there's going to be some good answers and good solutions about that. If you want to enlighten us more about any preliminary thoughts or findings, and maybe ask the University of California. I didn't hear you talk about that too much as far as the outcomes so far, if any.
There's not a whole lot at this point to report on, as we're just currently in discussions of the committee and its staff with multiple experts around in the field and at the university. So the preliminary report will be released in March at the board meeting.
And do you anticipate finding some issues there that you'll be able to put forth through the budget process, potentially in the May revise?
At this point, it's kind of too early to tell. We're hopeful that we come to some joint solutions.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say I think it's it's been a very constructive process. We've been able to hear from experts both from within the university and across higher education on different models and different ideas. I think there are things that will be constructive and very helpful for the university to serve more Californians. Things that may help us reduce the time to degree or increase streamlining of transfers. They may not all necessarily lead to cost reductions, but they will certainly lead to the ability to provide more access to UC for all Californians.
Thank you. Mr. Ting?
First question for the LAO. Just can you walk us through a little bit your methodology and how you broke out the per student expenditure? And also, I don't know if you've seen the committee's breakout on page 4 with some of the large buckets.
Right. So essentially what we do is taking the data from page 4, this is reported back to the state in the governor's budget, we would take only that first category, general campus instruction, and then we would take a proportionate share of academic support, student support, institutional support, and operation and maintenance of plant. What we're trying to do here, and this is sort of a methodology that people use nationally in higher education, and the university has a similar methodology too, is trying to isolate what are the education costs versus research and public service. And it's challenging because they're intertwined, but this is the way the information is reported to the state. So that's the basic methodology, and then we divide by the number of students to get a per student.
And how different is your figure than what the universities provided?
I think the main difference is, as I mentioned, in the general campus category, we're including all all funds, so including things that have not been considered core funds in the past, things like philanthropy, but those are supporting general campus instruction. Traditionally, the universities only used core funds in their report.
So is your expenditure per student higher than theirs?
It would be, if you added in the additional funds, yes.
Okay. And just going back to that was my question to the Vice Chancellor was, how does your number differ? And that's sort of been a figure that we've been requesting for a number of years. And I know that's been a challenge, but we really would hope that, in particular this year, we make a greater effort to try to really get there so we understand what the cost of educating students is.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the question, and I think the expenditure for instruction report that we released yesterday goes there. You can see what we have in the core funds with tuition and general funds, but then we have all other funds, and that really does reflect a lot of things that the LAO is reflecting. Medical center support of our medical education, the private philanthropy, which we're trying to get used more for core.
If I could just interrupt, I mean, I understand your analysis primarily is presenting really the revenue side. I think I'm more interested on what the expense side is, and I think that's where we've had, really challenges to get a better understanding of what you're spending the money on.
The report is for expenditures, but it does. I mean, we are the way we're supporting that. Otherwise, we'd have a big deficit. We are drawing on other fund sources to help support that.
Right, but I guess even in your presentation here, it was not very clear, in particular, your cost of expenditure to educate the students, because obviously one of the prime issues in front of the committee, and the Department of Finance eloquently put it, was around the potential fee increases, and that justification was primarily around the cost to educate students, which primarily your presentation doesn't really touch on.
Yeah, what I presented today was incremental. It was the incremental cost that we would be using for, the items that I had laid out. But those all are on the expenditure side.
So what does it cost for your estimation? I know Mr. Lenz presented it last year. What's your estimation as of now to what's your cost per student?
So in the expenditure for instruction report, which we released yesterday. We have two different definitions. One is very narrow, where we just look at historic things on instruction, academic support. Where's the thing? Instruction, academic support, student services, and financial aid. When we do that on a blended undergraduate basis, it's $22,000 per undergraduate. When we do a broader analysis, and that's to take into account what we would call indirect costs, things like depreciation, amortization, interest costs on buildings and things, and we divide it between instruction, research, and public service, it gets up to $29,000. It's much higher for graduate students and significantly higher for health sciences students.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chavez?
I'm going to follow off on Assembly Member Ting. I think I'm right with him on the issue of the cost versus the revenue. But I'm interested also in the terms we're using. Ms. Kissy, did I pronounce that right?
Kissy, yeah.
Kissy. In your report that you gave us, you have a term there called cost drivers. And then also the report that was given by Mr. Braunstrom, he uses the term cost drivers. Are you using it in the same context? Or are we using cost drivers differently in in the same presentation?
Yes, I think overall, generally, we are.
I don't like general, I like specific. Define to me cost driver.
Okay. Compensation and benefits, enrollment.
No, I don't mean that. Define to me the term cost driver. What is a cost driver?
Well, elements within the UC budget that ultimately creates the demand for expenditures.